Welcome back. We are finishing the body language rabbit hole today. This one gets deeper fast because it is really about trust, status, and people reading you before you speak. And then it goes all the way into bullying, which is where the whole thing gets ugly. Okay, first thing, the open posture idea sounds almost too simple. Like sit up, uncross your arms, and suddenly your life is fixed? Not fixed, but changed because the body is not just decoration. That part I actually buy, because people feel your nervous system before they hear your sentence. Yes, your vibes are speaking before your mouth gets its act together. Exactly. And that is why the whole penguin arms thing is so funny and tragic. The image of someone pinning their elbows like they are trying not to offend gravity. But it makes sense because shrinking is a message too. And in a room, people mirror that shrinking unless somebody with status interrupts it. That power differential bit is the real sauce here. When the boss walks in, the whole room changes shape. Everyone suddenly becomes 20% smaller and 10% less honest. And that is why leadership body language matters more than people think. If you lean back too hard, cross your arms, or look bored, you shut people down. Which is wild, because leaders think confidence means filling the room. But trust is actually the conduit, not volume. That line is expensive because it ruins a lot of business myths. So maybe being the smartest person in the room is not the flex people think it is. It is such a pathetic little flex when nobody trusts you. Exactly, because ideas do not travel through people who feel unseen. That is why asking questions first is not weakness, it is strategy. Though I do love that she is basically saying stop monologuing at humans. Yes, revolutionary concept, listen to the other primate. And that connects to eye contact, which is way less universal than people assume. I love that she refused to pretend eye contact has one meaning. In some cultures it reads as honesty, in others it reads as aggression. Basically, staring is a regional language. That is actually exactly right. And then the primate comparison is useful, but only up to a point. Because human beings are doing culture on top of biology all the time. Which is why every body language guru who pretends there are universal hacks annoys me. They always sound like they are selling a dating course in a blazer. But the dating stuff is interesting because the signs are embarrassingly obvious. The leaning in, the leaning out, the smile when somebody goes to the bathroom. That bathroom break reveal is brutal, like the truth walked off with the napkins. What she is really saying is that attraction is hard to hide for long. And neither is discomfort, which is why fake confidence tends to leak. That part hit me, because people always want tactics before they want change. But if your inner story is broken, the tactics become costume jewelry. That is the inside-out thing, right? Yeah, not outside-in performance, but actual identity shift. That was probably the deepest part of the whole conversation. Because she is saying you can fake a behavior, but not a whole self forever. And that student story was powerful because it was not about pretending to be fearless. It was about behaving like someone who deserved space until she could believe it. Fake it till you become it is a much better sentence than fake it till you make it. The first one sounds like growth, the second sounds like fraud with a LinkedIn profile. But the sad part is how much of that depends on other people giving you room. Which leads straight into the bullying section, and that got dark fast. Yeah, that was the heaviest part of the whole episode. What she described was not drama, it was social destruction. And the awful thing is how often institutions let it metastasize. I thought the idea of disinformation in academia was really chilling. Because once the lie is attached to your name, you spend years correcting error. That line about not being able to undo every old article was painful. It is like someone keeps leaving fingerprints on your future. And the part about status made the whole thing make sense without making it less ugly. Some people bully because they think attention is a fixed pie. So if you rise, they feel robbed. Exactly. And then they test you to see if you will tolerate the first hit. The bystander piece is what hurts because everyone loves to blame the target later. But early pushback changes the entire script. I also thought the status explanation was better than the usual low self-esteem story. Yeah, because a lot of bullies sleep fine. Which is infuriating, honestly. They often think they are justified, which is somehow worse. The part that felt most relevant now was how famous people get targeted for standing out. Once you cross that line of resentment, people want to pull you back down. It is basically the social version of who do you think you are. Exactly, but with a professional development budget. And that is why the optimism matters, because she is not calling it human destiny. She is saying cultures can reward courage instead of cruelty. The incentive structure can change if people actually agree to react differently. That gave the whole thing some hope. And then we ended on sadness, which was a beautiful little trapdoor. She absolutely refused the no sadness utopia, which I respect because grief is part of being fully human. If you delete sadness, you delete empathy, memory, and probably art. And probably all the songs people actually play when they are alone. Exactly, nobody is healing to an algorithmic happy anthem. So the real answer is not to erase sadness, but to understand it. Which feels like the whole episode in one sentence, honestly. Understand the body, understand trust, understand power, understand pain. And that is a pretty solid final chapter for this series. Thanks for riding through both episodes with us because this one got real fast. We will be back with another series soon, and until then, stay open, stay curious. Welcome back. This episode gets into body language, trust, and why status makes people weird. Like the whole thing is basically how your body tells the truth before you do. And honestly, that is terrifying for anyone who has ever tried to act cool. Because you can say all the right words and still look like a stressed-out raccoon. Penguin arms, basically the body language of a person apologizing to gravity. That is such a brutal phrase, but also painfully accurate. What I liked is how she kept saying openness is not performance, it is regulation. Right, because it is not just about looking confident to other people. It changes how you feel inside, and that is the part people skip over. But people love the hack version, like give me a posture and I will become Batman. Exactly, no, you cannot power pose your way out of a broken self story. That was the real point. The inside-out change beats the outside-in trick every time. Which is such a nasty truth for the internet, because everyone wants the shortcut. Of course they do. The shortcut is cheaper than therapy and easier than honesty. And somehow always sold in a thread with 3 bullet points and a fake sunset. But her point about trust was even bigger than body language. You mean that if people do not trust you, your ideas do not travel? Yes, trust is the conduit, not some soft bonus thing on top. That destroys so many boardroom fantasies about being the smartest person in the room. Bro, imagine walking in with facts and wondering why nobody cares. Because nobody feels you yet, that is why. And I love the part about asking questions first instead of anchoring first. That is such a good move because it is not weakness, it is information gathering. Also, people like talking about themselves, which is the oldest operating system on Earth. Human beings are basically just search engines with feelings. The eye contact bit was interesting too because that is where people get super twitchy. Yeah, because eye contact is wildly cultural and wildly contextual. So the idea that there is one universal rule is just lazy. Exactly. In one place it reads as warmth, in another it reads as a threat. That is why people misread each other constantly and then build whole stories on top of it. Which is a bit depressing because we really do love making up narratives. The body language stuff became way more personal when she talked about being bullied. That section was intense, like genuinely hard to hear. And what stayed with me was the idea that bullying is social death. That is such a devastating phrase because it is not just insult, it is erasure. And the crazy part is it often starts with status, not even hate. Yeah, that need to feel above somebody, that is the engine. Basically, the most fragile people often want the biggest chair. And the second they do not get it, they start moving like little dictators. But she was very clear that this is a group behavior too, not just one villain. The bystander piece was probably the most important structural point. Because if people do nothing early, the thing hardens into a campaign. That is the part people hate hearing, because it implicates the room. Exactly. Bullying survives because everybody acts surprised later. And then we get this fake innocence where nobody saw anything. Which is ridiculous, because people always see something. They just decide not to become involved until it is unbearable. What I found fascinating was the status asymmetry thing. If you are low status inside a group and suddenly visible outside it, you become a target. That is such a nasty human reflex. Success is fine until it makes other people feel underdressed. That is so petty, but also completely true. And that is why celebrity bullying stories are always weirdly shocking to people. Because they assume public success protects you everywhere. It protects you in one arena and can provoke resentment in another. Which means status is not just money or fame, it is local and relative. Exactly, and that makes the whole thing much more psychologically messy. I also thought her fake it till you make it distinction was really sharp. Fake it till you make it is external. Fake it till you become it is internal. That is a massive difference, and it explains why one feels hollow and one feels transformative. Because you are not trying to fool the room anymore, you are training yourself. That student story was beautiful, actually. She was not pretending to be someone else. She was becoming visible to herself. And that is where confidence lives, not in pretending, but in recognition. Also, let us be honest, most of us have tried the fake version and it collapses fast. Especially when your body is giving you away every 3 seconds. Right, because there are too many channels to keep aligned forever. Tone, posture, breathing, hands, face, all of it has to cooperate. That is too much work for a lie to maintain, frankly. Which is actually comforting because truth is less exhausting. The most moving part for me was how she talked about sadness at the end. She basically refused the fantasy of a sadness-free world. And I think that is right because sadness is not a bug, it is signal. Hot take, but maybe the healthiest people are not the least sad. Maybe they are just the best at metabolizing pain without becoming rigid. That connects back to body language too, because openness is a kind of emotional metabolism. Exactly, the body is not decoration, it is part of the mind in motion. Which is a very unsexy sentence, but a very true one. I think that is why this whole 2-part series worked so well. It kept circling back to the same thing, which is how humans actually signal who they are. Not just with words, but with posture, trust, social courage, and grief. That is a lot of life packed into one conversation, honestly. And it felt like a very good final chapter for this series. We will be back with another series soon, and until then, stay open, stay curious. And maybe stop doing penguin arms when you are nervous. Or at least commit to them with confidence. Seriously, thanks for being here for both episodes. We really appreciate you making it to the end with us. Welcome back. This episode is all about body language, trust, and status wars. And somehow it ends up being about confidence, bullying, and sadness too. Which is a very normal podcast arc, obviously. The body language bit sounds simple, but it gets weirdly deep fast. Because she is not just saying stand taller and pretend. Right, this is not a LinkedIn pirate version of self-help. It is more like your body is leaking your state of mind. And other people are reading that leak instantly. That part about open posture felt almost embarrassingly obvious. Like, yes, maybe do not fold yourself into a tiny stressed pretzel. But the point is that openness is both message and medicine. That is what makes it interesting, not just performance. She keeps coming back to leaning forward, palms up, less armor. That is basically saying, I am safe enough to be present. And people mirror that, unless power changes the whole equation. The power differential thing is so real and also so annoying. Because the powerful person gets to become more relaxed and more dominant, while the nervous person shrinks and then gets read as less capable. That is the brutal part, the interaction keeps feeding itself. Exactly, the room starts rehearsing your insecurity back at you. And then you are not even just feeling nervous anymore, you are causing nervousness. Congratulations, your panic now has audience participation. The eye contact section was fascinating because it is so culturally loaded. What feels warm in one place can feel aggressive in another. That is why body language people always sound a bit too certain, as if every human being got the same software update. Meanwhile, some cultures treat staring like an invitation to war, and some treat too much eye contact like a social mistake. So the real skill is not decoding one universal system. It is reading context without becoming paranoid about it, which is easier said than done if you are already overthinking. I love the bit about penguin arms because everyone knows that person. The hands are trying to speak, but the shoulders have filed a complaint. It is such a perfect public speaking fear signal. But again, it is not just a pose, it is a state. And then there is the attraction stuff, which gets messy immediately. Restaurants become research labs the second two people flirt badly. Nothing says romance like silent panic and too much leaning. The signs are so obvious once you know what to watch for. Too much talking, not enough curiosity, too much space taken. And the body keeps confessing what the mouth is trying to hide. Especially when one person is smiling after the bathroom break like a school kid. That tiny private joy is usually the real tell. Can people fake body language, though, because everyone wants that trick? And the answer is basically no, not for long. Too many channels are moving at once for the lie to stay neat. Your voice, hands, posture, timing, all of it starts snitching. Your whole nervous system becomes an unreliable intern. What really changed things for her was not tricks, it was identity. That inside-out idea is the whole thesis, honestly. You change the story of who you are and your body follows. That is why the fake it till you become it line lands so hard. Because it is not fake confidence for applause, it is practice for becoming. She is drawing a line between impression management and self-transformation. And that student story makes it feel real instead of motivational wallpaper. Someone who thought she did not belong, then slowly became herself. That is the kind of story people actually remember in their bones. Then the conversation turns darker, and honestly it had to. Because bullying is basically status violence with extra paperwork. The way she describes it as social death is horrifying. Not metaphorically horrifying, actually structurally horrifying. And what is wild is how long disinformation can keep hurting someone. Even after the worst passes, the false story keeps circulating. That is such a cruel second life for a lie. Especially when people think they know your story from gossip. The motivation piece was interesting too because it is not random cruelty. It is often status hunger mixed with scarcity thinking. Translation, somebody decided the pie was too small and started swinging. And the bully test idea is terrifying because it starts so small. If nobody pushes back early, the behavior learns it can grow teeth. That is the bystander failure everyone pretends is abstract. It is also why she pushes the idea that bullying is changeable. Not because humans are perfect, but because incentives are adjustable. That is actually hopeful, which is rare in this topic. Though I get why people hesitate because it does feel human. But so do racism and misogyny, and we still fight those. So the real question becomes what culture rewards and what it punishes. Exactly, and trust is the bridge in all of this. If you do not build trust, your ideas have nowhere to land. You can be brilliant and still bounce off the wall like a bad dart. That image is way too accurate. Her point is that confidence without trust just sounds self-absorbed. So asking questions is not weakness, it is strategy. It makes people feel seen, and then they actually listen. That is the part that matters, being seen before being persuaded. And then we end on sadness, which I thought was perfect. Because the idea of removing sadness completely sounds fake and sterile. A world without sadness would probably lose empathy with it. Sadness is information, not a design flaw. It tells you what matters, what was lost, what needs care. So the bittersweet answer is basically no, keep the pain. Which is somehow the more humane answer, annoyingly. I think that is why this final stretch hit so hard. It started with posture and ended with what kind of human life we want. That is a very good place to end a series, honestly. Thanks for riding with us through both episodes. And thanks for letting us spiral from penguin arms into existential trust. We really appreciate you being here at the end. We will be back soon with another series, and we will see you then. Welcome back. We're deep into body language, trust, and the weird war on status. And it gets messy fast, because posture somehow turns into bullying and power. Which is absurd, but also annoyingly human. What I kept thinking was how much of this is learned before we even speak. The open body, the leaning forward, the palms up thing feels simple. But simple doesn't mean easy when you're scared. Especially when your arms turn into penguins and your soul leaves the chat. Penguin arms is such a brutal phrase, by the way. Yet it's real because people shrink when they feel unsafe. And then everyone else reads that shrinkage as less confidence. So the body is not just performing the mood, it's feeding the mood. That part feels almost unfair. Wait, but that also means small changes can matter more than people think. Like slower breathing, more space, less self-protection. Not a costume, more like a reminder to your nervous system. But then the eye contact part gets tricky really fast. Because eye contact is never just eye contact, it's culture, status, and threat. In some places it reads as honesty, in others it reads as aggression. In some lifts it means hello, in others it means hide your wallet. Exactly, same face, totally different survival response. That's why the read people advice is so slippery. You can learn patterns, but you cannot turn humans into barcode scans. although half the internet is trying desperately. The pickup artistry angle was the part that always felt a bit cursed to me. Cursed is the perfect word. Because once you reduce interaction to tricks, you lose the actual person. And the scary thing is the tricks can look convincing for a second. But the inconsistency leaks out through voice, timing, gaze, everything. Human beings are basically bullshit detectors with feelings. That should be on a t-shirt, honestly. What hit me harder was the inside-out point. Like you can't fake a stable self-image forever. If your story about yourself changes, your body changes with it. That's way bigger than posture hacks. It's why fake it till you make it is so misunderstood. She wasn't talking about lying better. She was talking about becoming more able to carry yourself. That student story was wild because it was transformation, not performance. She didn't just act braver, she got evidence that she belonged. And that is such a human lesson because evidence changes identity. Which brings us to trust, because that was the other huge thread here. People think confidence is the thing that wins the room. But trust is the actual conduit, not swagger. Swagger is just loud nervousness with better tailoring. That is offensively accurate. If people don't feel seen, your idea hits a wall. So asking questions is not weakness, it's leverage. It tells the other person you're actually listening before you try to persuade, which is rarer than it should be. Then the bullying section just detonates everything. The idea that social death can happen through status warfare is brutal. And the part about bystanders was almost more upsetting than the bullies themselves. Because it's not always the loud attack, it's the people who do nothing. Silence becomes permission very fast. And once the story about you gets rewritten, you're fighting on two fronts. You're surviving the harm and correcting the lie. That is exhausting just to hear about. What I found convincing was the status explanation. Some people don't feel powerful, so they try to feel superior. And then they treat another person's visibility like theft. Fame as a hostile takeover bid, basically. That is exactly the energy, yes. The scary part is how ordinary that can look from the outside. A couple of jokes, a little exclusion, a little rumor, and suddenly it snowballs. Which is why the early intervention piece matters so much. If people push back early, the whole machine loses momentum. That's how culture changes, not by waiting for the explosion. It changes when enough people decide cruelty is expensive. And I like the optimism there because it wasn't naive. It was basically, this is human, but humans can train differently. Which is a much better answer than just shrugging and saying, that's life. And that feels like the right note for the end of this series. We started with posture and ended up talking about dignity, which is a very podcast thing to do, frankly. Thanks for being with us through both episodes. We really appreciate you sticking around for the whole conversation. We'll be back soon with another series, and we'll see you then.